18:7-16. The sun sank low across the dry land, casting long shadows over the town of Harper's Mill. It was a harsh place, still bruised from the war, and harsher still on women who bore no children. Mirabelle Quinn sat at the edge of the parlor, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She wore a faded blue dress, one that once brought out the color in her eyes before they dulled from grief. She was 28, a widow, and had endured 3 miscarriages. In the eyes of the Quinn family, that made her a failure. Mrs. Quinn, her mother-in-law, stood in the center of the room, surrounded by stern-faced relatives. She did not sit. She did not need to. Her presence filled every corner of the house. "You were meant to carry on this family's name," the old woman began, voice sharp as splinters. "Instead, you brought nothing but emptiness." Mirabelle blinked, but said nothing. The insult was not new. What stung was hearing it in front of everyone. Cousins, in-laws, even the pastor's wife, all invited under the guise of a family supper. "3 times, Mrs. Quinn hissed. 3 little graves, and still you sit here like you belong." One of the younger women gasped, but no one spoke. Across the room, Mirabelle's brother-in-law shifted uncomfortably. He was the one who had inherited the estate after her husband passed. Mrs. Quinn turned to him now. "Elijah, sign the papers." "I don't want to," he started. "You will," she snapped, "for the honor of our name." He walked to the table, picked up the pen, and signed. Mirabelle stood, slow and dignified. "May I collect my things?" she asked softly. Mrs. Quinn waved her off. "You never really unpacked." Mirabelle turned, heart thudding but face unreadable. She walked quietly to the room she once shared with her husband, gathered a small bundle, a photo of him, still smiling, and a children's book with worn edges, a book she once dreamed of reading aloud. She left the house under cover of night. No carriage, no escort. The porch lamp flickered as she passed, her figure vanishing into the darkness without a single soul calling after her. Weeks passed, then months. Mirabelle walked west, taking odd jobs, staying in barns and inns, never longer than needed. She kept her eyes lowered when men passed, spoke only when spoken to. She became a ghost with a name no one knew. But one evening, as she crossed a wooded trail beyond a logging camp, a sound stopped her. A child's cry. She froze, heart pounding. The sound came again, frantic, broken, from deep in the trees. Mirabelle turned off the road and pushed through the underbrush. The forest was dark, and thorns scratched her arms, but she didn't stop until she found him, a boy, no older than 4, sitting alone by a fallen log, hands scraped, clothes torn, and cheeks streaked with tears. "Hey," she said gently, kneeling beside him. "Are you hurt?" He flinched, then nodded. "I'm not going to hurt you, sweetheart, I promise." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a crust of bread and a tin flask. "You hungry?" He took the bread, hands trembling. "I lost my pa," he whispered. Mirabelle's throat tightened. "We'll find him." She wrapped her shawl around his tiny shoulders, lifted him into her arms, and began walking toward the sound of dogs barking in the far distance. "Do you like stories?" she asked, as they walked. He nodded against her shoulder. "I know one about a horse who wanted to be a bird," she said, voice barely louder than the wind. She tried to fly, but her legs were too strong for floating. The boy let out a small laugh. By the time they reached the edge of a clearing, a lantern light bobbed in the distance. Shouts followed, calls of a boy's name. "Theo." "Is that you?" she asked. He nodded. "That's my pa." She set him down gently, watching him run toward the voices, her shawl still clinging to his back. Mirabelle remained in the shadows, heart pounding, unsure whether to stay or turn away. But fate had a longer journey planned, and the story of the woman once cast out had only just begun. The valley lay quiet beneath a low morning mist as Mirabelle walked toward the modest ranch house nestled between 2 hills. The child on her back, Theo, had fallen asleep, his small arms limp around her neck. The land smelled of damp hay and distant horses, the faint scent of wood smoke in the breeze. As she reached the gate, a dog barked. Moments later, the front door swung open with a sharp creak. A man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a hardened look that mirrored the land. In his hands, he held a shotgun, not raised but not lowered either. His eyes were gray as steel, under a furrowed brow. He didn't say a word at first, just stared. Then a small voice broke the silence. "Pa." The child stirred at the sound and lifted his head. "Pa." The man's grip on the gun slackened slightly. "Theo?" "I found him in the woods," Mirabelle said quietly. "He was alone, lost. I just wanted to get him home." The man stepped forward, reaching out for the boy. Theo slid from her back and ran into his father's arms. The man knelt, embracing him, closing his eyes for a moment. Then, standing, he turned to Mirabelle again. "You from town?" "No," she said. "Just passing through." "You come with him?" "No. I heard him crying. I followed the sound." He studied her. "That's so. I mean no harm, mister. Colton Ridge." He didn't offer a hand. "You can go now." Mirabelle's fingers curled around the strap of her satchel. "I haven't eaten in 2 days," she admitted. "But if you'd rather I leave, I will." He narrowed his eyes. "I don't keep strangers here. Not overnight." She nodded, tried to step back, but her legs trembled. The world tilted sideways, and everything went black. Later, when she awoke, it was to the sound of soft whispering and the smell of something warm nearby. She blinked slowly and found herself lying on a cot inside what looked like a storeroom, lined with shelves of dried herbs, preserved fruit, a stack of linens. A girl's voice whispered, "She's waking up." Another voice, a boy's, said, "Is she a witch?" "She doesn't look like one," came the youngest voice. "Go help your sister in the kitchen," came a firm command from outside the door. Footsteps shuffled away. The door creaked open, and Colton Ridge stepped in, arms crossed. "You passed out." "I'm sorry," she murmured, attempting to sit up. "Don't," he said. "You need food. You'll get it. Then you'll go." She glanced down at her hands, pale and shaking. "I understand," she said. But Colton didn't respond. He stared at her for a long moment before turning to leave. "Your boy," she called after him. "He's kind and brave. You've raised him well." He paused in the doorway. Then he was gone. From the shadows, Mirabelle whispered to no one, "I'm not here to stay, just to breathe." And outside, beyond the barn, 4 children watched the door their father had just closed, eyes wide, hearts uncertain. The morning sun crept through the cracks of the wooden shed, casting pale golden light on the rough floor where Mirabelle had slept. Her body ached, but the distant clatter of hooves and the gentle murmurs of children brought her to her feet. She smoothed her skirt, brushed her hair with her fingers, and stepped out quietly into the kitchen. Colton was already gone, likely tending to the fences, and the 4 children sat quietly at the long table, their eyes wide with expectation. Mirabelle glanced at the empty pots on the stove, then at the sparse supplies nearby. She didn't speak. Instead, she rolled up her sleeves and began to cook. She prepared biscuits from leftover flour and lard, stirred a modest vegetable stew, and carefully sliced some of the last salt pork. The children's eyes sparkled as the aroma filled the room. She served each plate, smiling gently, then stood back, not eating herself. Her hands trembled slightly, but her heart felt steady for the first time in a long while. She gathered her shawl, intent on leaving before anyone could stop her. But just as she stepped toward the door, a small voice called behind her. "Miss?" It was Theo, the youngest, holding a small, chipped bowl of the stew she had made. "Pa's stew never tastes like yours. Will you stay? Just to make more?" Mirabelle knelt to meet his eyes, her breath catching in her throat. She reached to tuck a curl behind his ear. "I was just passing through," she said softly. "But I don't want you to pass through," Theo whispered, his voice trembling. "Please stay." Behind them, a shadow filled the doorway. Colton stood silently, arms crossed, his gaze unreadable. After a long pause, he spoke. "You can stay, for now, but you earn your place here." "I intend to," Mirabelle replied, her voice calm. And so she did. Over the next weeks, she worked as hard as any hired hand. She mended worn-out trousers, scrubbed the hearth, cooked hearty meals, and told quiet bedtime stories when Colton's voice faltered. One morning, Mirabelle found Mary, the eldest, curled in the barn with a tear-streaked face and a letter clutched in her hands. It was a note from her late mother. Mary couldn't read it. Without a word, Mirabelle took her hand. That afternoon, she gathered the children under a tree and began teaching them letters using sticks and dirt. She read from the old children's book she had carried across half the country, giving new life to its worn pages. Soon, lessons became a daily ritual. With Colton's quiet consent, she cleaned out a corner of the old goat shed and turned it into a makeshift schoolhouse. There, she taught them not just letters, but how to make simple traps, carve wooden toys, and understand stories from far-off lands. She brought color into a world that had long been gray. The children's laughter returned. Emma, once silent, began humming. Luke Jr. asked questions. Mary smiled again. Theo clung to her apron like a shadow. Colton observed from afar. He never said much. But when he passed by the school shed and saw Mary reading aloud, or Theo showing him a wooden rabbit he had carved, his eyes softened. Late one night, after the children had gone to sleep, Mirabelle slipped quietly into the kitchen. She pinned a new drawing above the hearth, a sketch in soft charcoal of the 4 children gathered around the school shed, their faces lit with joy. She didn't sign it. In the morning, the children noticed first. "Look," Emma pointed. "That's us." Mary tilted her head, smiling. "She even got your missing tooth, Theo." Colton said nothing, just looked at the drawing for a long moment. Then, with deliberate care, he adjusted the pin to straighten the picture. Mirabelle, watching silently from the hallway, smiled and stepped back into the shadows. Her name might never be spoken in full, but something deep and invisible had begun to root. And this time, it felt like it might stay. The rain came hard that night, drumming on the roof like 1,000 hooves. Thunder cracked the sky open, and somewhere beyond the dark hills, lightning struck close. Mirabelle had just finished rinsing the last dish when a scream, shrill and raw, pierced through the storm. It was the cry of an animal. She rushed to the back window and saw Colton sprinting toward the barn, lantern in hand. A massive branch had fallen across the corral. One of the young calves was trapped beneath, bleating in pain. Without hesitation, Mirabelle grabbed her shawl and ran out into the downpour. "Go back inside," Colton barked over the thunder as he heaved at the branch. But she was already beside him, boots sinking in the mud, fingers gripping bark. Together, they strained until the branch rolled off with a shuddering thud. The calf's leg was bruised, but not broken. "It's shivering," Mirabelle said, already stripping off her soaked shawl. She wrapped the calf gently, hands trembling not from the cold, but from adrenaline. "You'll be all right, baby," she whispered to the animal, voice soft as balm. Colton stood frozen for a moment, rain trailing down his face. "You're soaked through." "I'm fine," she managed with a weak smile, though her knees buckled as she stood. By the time they reached the house, she was burning up. Her lips were pale, skin clammy. Colton carried her inside, barked orders at the kids to fetch blankets, then settled her near the stove in the back kitchen. He brewed ginger tea in silence, the air thick with wood smoke and unspoken things. When he placed the steaming cup beside her, her eyes fluttered open. "You're reckless," he muttered. "Could have gotten hurt." "Someone had to help that calf," she murmured, voice barely audible. "And I wasn't about to let you do it alone." He did not respond, just sat there for a long while, watching the fire crackle, hands gripping the teacup like it might explain the ache in his chest. The next morning, she awoke to warmth and silence. The fever had passed. On the stool beside her bed sat the empty teacup and a folded wool blanket. She touched it and smiled. Later that week, the children began calling her Miss Mary. It started with Emma, mimicking how her doll spoke to her imaginary teacher. Then, Luke Jr. picked it up. By the end of the week, all four said it with ease, like the name had always belonged to her. One afternoon, Mirabelle showed them how to build miniature cabins from sticks and moss, the kind she remembered from storybooks. They built a whole village behind the barn. Laughter echoed again through the yard, high-pitched, unburdened, alive. From the porch, Colton watched it unfold. Mirabelle kneeling in the grass, dirt on her apron, her face lit by a grin as she showed Theo how to prop up a tiny twig wall. He did not intend to smile, but when Theo turned around and shouted, "Pa, look at this," Miss Mary helped. Colton's lips curved, soft and quick, and Emma, sharp-eyed as ever, caught it. Pa smiled, she hollered with delight. "He did, I saw it." Mirabelle looked up, startled, then chuckled, her laughter low and genuine. Their eyes met, his full of something unspoken, hers lit with surprise. He did not look away this time, just gave a slow nod and turned back toward the porch. It was the first time he had let himself be seen like that. And it would not be the last. It began with a basket of berries and an innocent laugh. One sunny morning, Mirabelle took Theo by the hand and led him through the woods behind the pasture to gather wild strawberries. The boy had been restless, and the other children were busy with chores. She thought the fresh air and small adventure would do him good. They returned an hour later, hands stained red, laughter clinging to their clothes. Unfortunately, someone had been watching. By the next market day, whispers slithered through town like snakes in the grass. A woman named June Parker, widow of a banker and self-proclaimed guardian of moral virtue, told the butcher. She lured that child into the forest, like some witch from a tale. Her voice carried just enough doubt to plant suspicion. Another muttered, "Colton's wife ain't cold in the ground a year, and that woman's already setting roots." And so, it spread. "She laughs too loud for a widow. She walks like she owns the Ridge place. I heard Colton lets her sleep in the main house." By week's end, the gossip had grown teeth. "She's after the land," someone hissed in church. "Probably the one who brought sickness on his wife," another snapped. "These barren women always carry bad luck." Mirabelle knew something had changed. The smiles in town became tighter, the eyes colder. She kept to the ranch, trying not to let the stares bite, but the storm came anyway. One afternoon, as Mirabelle was washing up after supper, a knock slammed against the door. Colton opened it to find 6 women standing stiff and straight as fence posts, led by June Parker. "We need a word," June said, lips pressed thin. Colton stepped aside, arms crossed, silent. They stood in the parlor like a tribunal. One glanced at Mirabelle, who appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "It's about her," June said. "You must understand, Colton. The town is concerned. Your children are young, impressionable. She's not from here." Colton's brow tightened. "She saved my boy's life." "We're not questioning that," June replied, smiling too tightly. "But people are talking. About impropriety. About intentions. It's not good for the children, or for your reputation." Another woman chimed in. "You should ask her to leave, quietly, before more damage is done." Behind the curtain, Mary, Luke Jr., Emma, and Theo huddled together. When the voices rose, Theo darted from hiding, ran straight to Mirabelle, and wrapped his arms around her leg. "Don't let them take her," he cried. "She's our Miss Mary." Mirabelle froze. The other children followed, clutching her skirt, eyes wide with fear. Colton turned slowly to face the women. His voice, when it came, was ice. "This woman," he said, nodding at Mirabelle, cooks for my children, bandages their scrapes, teaches them to read. She sings when she thinks no one hears. She's the only reason this house has had laughter in it since my wife passed." June opened her mouth, but he raised a hand. "If you're here to protect the town, go do it. But leave my home, and the people in it, alone." One by one, the women filed out. June lingered last, her face dark with warning. "I hope you know what you're doing, Colton." He didn't answer, just shut the door behind her, with finality. That night, no one spoke of it, but Mirabel found a new drawing on the wall, done in crayon by Emma. It showed 5 stick figures holding hands, 4 small, 1 with a braid. Over them, in crooked letters, it read, "Our family." The wind outside howled through the cracks in the wooden walls, carrying the scent of pine and the memory of winter. Inside the dimly lit parlor, the fire crackled softly, casting a warm glow on the faces of 4 children curled up around Mirabel. She sat with her back against the wall, a book in her lap, but tonight she had not opened it. "I want to tell you something," she said gently, her voice barely above the fire's whisper. Mary looked up first, her eyes alert. Luke Jr. stopped fidgeting. Emma held tightly to her doll. Theo, ever close, climbed into Mirabel's lap without a word. "I had a baby once," Mirabel said, pausing. 3 times actually, but none of them ever got to see the world. The room went still. Even the flames seemed to hush. "I used to read stories to a little pair of shoes," she smiled faintly, eyes glossy, "because I thought someday I'd read them to my child, but he or she never got to hear them." Mary's lower lip quivered. "Why not?" Mirabel touched her hand. "Sometimes the world just isn't fair, and it hurts. A lot." Emma shuffled closer. "Did it hurt your heart?" "All the time," Mirabel whispered. There was silence, thick and gentle. Then Mary stood and disappeared into the back room. She returned with a small, faded blue knitted scarf. "I made this for my doll last winter," she said, holding it out. "But if your baby was here, maybe they'd want it too." Mirabel's lips parted, but no words came. Her hand shook as she took the scarf. "Thank you," she finally breathed. "That means more than I can say." What she did not know was that Colton had been standing just outside the room, half hidden behind the hall wall, listening. His eyes, usually hard as river stones, shimmered in the firelight. He watched the exchange in silence, every word Mirabel said sinking into places inside him he had kept locked since the day his wife died. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed and the embers had dimmed to a gentle red, Colton stepped into the room. Mirabel was sitting alone at the table, still clutching the little scarf. "I didn't mean for them to see me cry," she murmured without looking up. "They needed to," Colton said simply. She looked at him. "Why?" He walked over slowly, holding something wrapped in a piece of old flannel. With quiet hands, he placed it in front of her. It was a small wooden box, worn smooth at the edges. Mirabel opened it cautiously. Inside were letters, yellowed with time, some tied with twine, some folded with care. She picked one up and recognized the handwriting before reading a single word. It was a woman's, intimate, loving. "She wrote those to me before we married," Colton said, "and after, when I was off to war." Mirabel looked up, startled. He continued, voice steady. "I kept them too long. Held on because I was afraid if I let go, I'd forget how it felt to be known." Mirabel closed the box gently, her fingers resting on the lid. "She loved you," she said. "She did," Colton replied, "and she would have wanted me to remember her that way, not by keeping the house quiet or my heart colder than the prairie frost." He sat across from her, leaned back, exhaled deeply. "My children need someone who's still here, not a shadow." They sat in silence. The fire gave one last crackle. Then Colton stood. As he passed, he laid a hand lightly on her shoulder. "I'll start fresh if you will," he said. "Not for me, for them." Mirabel nodded, eyes shining. For them. In that quiet, unremarkable moment, something heavy in both of them gave way. Not with drama, but with the simple, life-altering sound of trust being born. Under the soft golden light of dawn that filtered through the kitchen window, the wooden floor gleamed faintly, and Mirabelle's sketchbook lay open on the corner table. Her hands were smudged with charcoal, the product of a sleepless night spent capturing the small, quiet miracles of the Ridge household. Theo asleep with a thumb in his mouth, Emma balancing on the chicken fence with wild hair, Mary brushing Luke Jr.'s tousled locks on the porch, and Colton fixing the fence beneath the setting sun. Each line had been drawn with the care of someone who had once thought they would never witness such moments again. She never signed any of her drawings. They were tucked away silently, left in drawers or beside the hearth, as if by hiding them, she could protect herself from hope. But this one, of the entire Ridge family, laughing together, with Colton's hand resting gently on Mary's shoulder, she had hung on the kitchen wall before the first light of day. It felt like a goodbye gift, a confession she was too afraid to speak aloud. That morning, Mirabelle rose earlier than usual. The house was still, save for the gentle creaking of the wind against the shutters. Wrapped in her worn shawl, she stood by the door, her bag clutched tightly to her chest. Her heart ached with a bittersweet heaviness. Despite the warmth she had found in this place, the crackling fire, the scent of wild mint drying in the kitchen, the laughter of children, she still believed herself to be an outsider, temporary, a shadow passing through. She had lived long enough to know, things that do not belong eventually must leave. Just as her hand reached for the doorknob, the soft thudding of small footsteps echoed behind her. "Theo," she whispered, turning. "Miss Mary, where are you going?" Theo's voice cracked, frightened. Before she could answer, Emma and Luke Jr. dashed into the hallway, wrapping themselves around her legs like roots, refusing to let go. Mary arrived last, breathless, holding something behind her back. "Don't go," Mary said, her eyes wide and watery. "We saw it." Mirabelle turned toward the wall. There, bathed in the golden wash of morning light, hung her charcoal drawing, untitled, unsigned, and now fully seen. "You drew us," Luke Jr. said softly. "Even Pa." Emma pointed at the fence in the picture. "That's where I climbed. You got my hair right too." Mirabelle's throat tightened. "I only wanted to remember," she murmured. "I didn't mean for anyone to see." Mary stepped forward and extended her hand, revealing a single wildflower stem, freshly picked, dew still clinging to its petals. "Pa put it up. He didn't say anything, but if he hung it, that means your family." Behind them, Colton stood in the doorway, silent as always. His gaze met Mirabelle's, steady, unwavering. He nodded once, slow, sure. The children rushed in and wrapped their arms around her waist, their voices rising together. "Don't go, Miss Mary. You're one of us now." Mirabelle dropped to her knees, arms encircling them tightly. Her shoulders trembled, and for the first time in years, she cried, not from pain, not from grief, not from the long ache of rejection, but from the overwhelming truth that, at last, she belonged. It was the first Sunday of May. The town gathered at the clearing near the old cottonwood tree for the annual memorial, a quiet ritual honoring those lost to the war, to disease, to time itself. There were no grand speeches, only the slow strumming of a banjo and rows of wooden crosses planted into the soft earth. Mirabelle stood at the edge of the crowd, unsure if she belonged. Her dress was plain, her hands folded tightly. Beside her, Mary clutched her fingers with quiet determination, while Emma twirled the hem of her own skirt with restless anticipation. Luke Jr. and Theo had flowers in hand, but their eyes kept drifting to Colton. The man, as always, had been silent most of the morning. Yet, as the names of the fallen were read aloud, Colton suddenly stepped forward. The whisper in the crowd was audible. His presence at public gatherings was rare since his wife's passing. But what drew more attention was the fact that he reached back and gently took Mirabelle's hand. He didn't ask. He didn't glance her way. He simply held on, firm and steady. When they reached the front, Colton turned to face the small congregation. "There's been talk," he said, his voice rough but steady, "about who belongs and who does not, about what family means." Mirabelle's breath hitched. Her fingers trembled in his grasp. Colton continued, "This woman didn't take anything from me. She didn't steal a place. She didn't replace anyone. What she did was give my children something war never let them keep: trust." The crowd fell silent. From the back, a figure stepped forward. Mr. Edwin Tanner, an old war veteran who'd lost all 3 sons in the Confederate ranks. He leaned on a cane, voice breaking. "Back in '63, I buried the last of my boys. Since then, I've seen people come and go, pretend and lie. But that young'un," he pointed toward Theo, "called her Ma. And that may be the only thing that still means something in this world." A hush rolled over the clearing, followed by a swell of emotion. "Ma!" Theo suddenly shouted, breaking from his siblings and running toward her. "Ma!" His cry seemed to give the others permission. Mary dropped the flowers and ran too. Emma followed, arms outstretched. Luke Jr., quiet and usually reserved, walked up last, placing the flowers at Mirabelle's feet before hugging her waist. The crowd watched, some nodding through tears, others too choked up to speak. Mirabelle knelt and hugged them back, burying her face into their hair, her shoulders shaking not from grief, but from something like healing. Later that evening, in the quiet warmth of the Ridge home, the fire crackled low in the hearth. The children slept, all 4 tucked into the patchwork of quilts Mirabelle had sewn. Colton stood at the kitchen table, his hands fidgeting with a small white cloth. "I was going to wait," he said, not looking up, "but I think we've waited long enough." He unfolded the cloth. It was a simple handkerchief, but someone had stitched into it in fine, clean thread. "Family does not require blood, only the will to choose." Mirabelle stepped forward. "Did you make this?" Colton shook his head. "Emma did. She said you'd understand." Tears pricked at Mirabelle's eyes. "I do." And with nothing more than a nod, Colton stepped close and kissed her. Gentle, firm, no rush, just truth. Their wedding, days later, had no music, no flowers, no preacher's booming voice, just a quiet circle under the oak tree behind the house. The children placed rings, simple bands made from braided grass, and declared her theirs. And finally, in the truest sense, she was home. Thank you for riding through this journey with Mirabelle and the Ridge family, from exile to home, from silence to a single word that changed everything. Ma. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that family can be chosen, that healing can come even in the quietest moments, then don't forget to hit that hype button. And if you want more tales of love, redemption, and second chances set against the rugged backdrop of the Wild West, subscribe to the Wild West Love Stories channel. There's more where this came from. And trust me, you won't want to miss what's next. Thanks for watching, partner. See you on the next trail.